Welcome to A March for the Ages. I'm Tyra Wilson from Brubaker Technology Magnet High School, and our guest today is Ms. Doris Crenshaw. How are you today, Ms. Crenshaw?
I'm fine, and how are you?
I'm good. Very excited to be interviewing you. Just have a few questions for you about the civil rights movement and your current involvement with activism today, especially with the youth. But we're going to start with the movement. How old were you when the civil rights movement began?
Well, I was 11 years old when I was recruited by Mrs. Parks to join the Youth Council of the NAACP. I guess that's the period you want to talk about. We had been active in registering voters and that prior to that with the Youth Federated Women's Clubs. But all around us were people registering people to vote. Talking about registering to vote was the article of the day. I mean, everybody talked about it in churches and organizations and even the teachers at school.
So, what was it like before the talk about recruiting people to vote? Were people more complacent about not being able to vote, or was there always a buzz about trying to vote?
That was a struggle in the city when leaders tried, such as E.D. Nixon and others, to get people to register to vote, and other issues of the day. Prominent among those issues was the plight of women riding the buses and being arrested. Most people don't talk about it, but for 20 years, the Women's Political Council strove to do something about women who were supposed to be arrested, but when they were arrested were taken off and raped. So over 800 women were arrested prior to Ms. Parks. So there was a feeling, deep feeling in the community, but there was also a fear. And that fear was overcome when Dr. King came to town and people held their heads up. And we did 381 days of boycotting the buses. And we sparked a movement worldwide. People in other cities in this country, but also in other countries, give credit to the movement of the Montgomery bus boycott as their inspiration. The Little Rock Nine, the Greensboro Four, people in Africa and Germany, all give Montgomery the courage of the people with the boycott as an inspiration for them to start movements in their various places.
So do you think that only Montgomery could have handled a bus boycott or a civil rights movement? Do you think it could have happened anywhere else across the nation?
I'm heavily believe in God, and I think she selects different places and different people at different times. In the book, Why We Can't Wait, Dr. King raises the question about whether or not it could have been Montgomery, if it could have been any place else. I think that the fervor was ripe here. But don't get me wrong, people were very, very much afraid of the White Citizen Council and their addicts. And people were beaten a lot for resisting some of the practices that they made. Before the bus boycott, for example, the black men who rode on the trucks for the city to read the meters in the neighborhoods were not able to receive a check from the city. It was illegal. They had to stand and wait on the corner of Monroe Street down here to see if the white man would cash the check and give them their money. Sometimes they would, and sometimes they wouldn't. But we strove through that, and a lot was going on. There was Jeremiah Reeves, who was a young black guy who was accused of raping a white woman, and she had seduced him. So the community was ripe, and the persons were the right people. Mrs. Parks and Mr. Nixon. Mrs. Parks had worked with the NAACP for years and often wrote reports. She would sneak up on the plantations and get stories she would give to E.D. Nixon, who took them on the trains up to New York and to the NAACP and other places where they needed to be taken. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. What do you think? You said fear was prevalent among everyone.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think really overtook the fear and gave people the courage to fight for what, according to the Constitution, was theirs all along?
I think they were very much inspired by the mass meetings, and the songs lifted people up. And when you sing, you're not afraid. Because I was always afraid out there, but when we would sing, the fear would go away. And I think the more that we did, and the unity that we had in the community, the faith in each other, and Mrs. Abernathy and Mrs. King often said that there was no other city like Montgomery. And all the cities that they went to, they found the love and the camaraderie. But when the boycott was over, there were certain agents that said never again. And so then we had the divisiveness and that we have today in Montgomery.
So I have two questions and I don't know which to ask first, but I guess I'll ask, what role did the women play? You know, we hear about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X all the time in civil rights, but...
Yes, I'm happy that you asked that, because the women were the wheel in the Montgomery bus boycott and all the other movements. Women and students carried the day for that. People such as Joanne Robinson, Dr. Mary Fairburg, Ida Williams. I could name hundreds of women in this community that risked their lives. And there are many, many stories, horror stories, about what they went through beatings and jail and that kind of thing. The reason I think that women in the background is because we don't write. So if we don't write about ourselves and other people, women are just like, that category is just like black people. We don't write. So it doesn't matter what you say. If it's not written, it doesn't count. That's why I'm going to write.
So how important is it then to learn not only about your ancestors, and their trials, what they went through, but also record what they've gone through?
I'm not sure I understand. How important is it to write about your ancestors?
How important is it to learn about them and then record what they've gone through?
It's very important to learn. It's very important to learn. And I encourage young people all the time to read. And you get a better understanding. You know, you just can't go by what they say on television. Read about this history. Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, Martin Luther King. All of the people that talk to us about in history, read what they have written and write yourself.
So for today's youth, you have founded the Southern Youth Leadership Development Institute. What impact does that institution have on the youth today?
We've been trying to train a cadre of young people in Montgomery who would take on the issue of education, their education, learn about how education policy is made, and do something to make a difference about some of the problems that they have in the schools, bullying, how the money is spent, how the resources are spent. Lobby your people at the appropriate levels to get what you need to get in your schools. And if you just take on the whole question of education, not to be, big and sexy, just a little education. What does the school board do? Montgomery County School Board, what do they do? And what does the state school board do? And then you have an education committee down at the legislature. You need to go down to the legislature, to the education committee meeting. Take the time out and see and begin to write letters about what they're doing. And when you get to be 18 years old, register to vote. And then you can invite people who are elected to come and talk to you, and you ask them and require of them, make some demands of them on things that affect your education.
So how would a student go from just sitting in the classroom and reading about Rosa Parks, Dr. King, E.D. Nixon, to becoming an activist themselves? Are there isolated steps that you take, or is it just...
I think what you do is find something that you're passionate about. Mm-hmm. People in that day were passionate about being able to register to vote. So you need to find something that you are passionate about, and then you convince another person. The thing that people don't realize is there was not, in the beginning, thousands and thousands of people. You start with one or two people. When we went into a city or town, there was often one or two people who lived in somebody's home. And then they began to mobilize the community, and you began to take a few people to church. And then you filled up the churches, but it's a process. But you start with you, with something that's burning in your soul, that you want to see something changed around that. And you find somebody else that you can convince that to feel like you do, and they'll bring somebody else, and then you grow into a movement. But you can have 5 people. You'll be surprised at what it takes at the U.S. Congress or at the state legislature, the number of letters. It is not that many, but we don't write at all. So they don't know, they don't have an idea that you have a concern about what they are voting on down in the legislature.
So if you feel as though you have an idea and you're passionate about it and you want something done about it, is it okay to resolve in yourself that one person is important, one letter is important, one message on Twitter or Facebook is important for me to get this issue started? Is that enough, or does it take so many people? Can you just be the one that says...
You can, you hear about this little gnat, you want to get rid of the little gnat, you can be one little gnat. Just have the conviction to stay on the issue that you're concerned about. Just one you. Just make the telephone calls. But I encourage you to recruit others, because just as you feel this way about something, there are other people in your class and in the schools and throughout Montgomery that have the same feeling and concern.
So I have one more question for you, and it's very important to me and I think other people around my age. Given the recent deaths of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, do you think we're on the cusp of another civil rights movement, or are we still fighting the civil rights movement that you were a part of?
We never stopped. I just want to know who sent out the notice that we had stopped and the civil rights movement had ended. We haven't stopped because there's still injustice in this country and in the world. So we still fight on that every day. People, different groups, are trying to do something about. You saw the people that rose up around Trayvon Martin and Mr. Brown, and there are people around the world, women rising. You just need to click on to what's going on in your world, because I don't know, or Twitter, nothing like that. I don't do that, but Your world is so instant. We had to walk and pass out leaflets. Today, instantly, you can send to thousands of people. So use the resources that you have. Find out what's going on in the world. Now, today, it's not just Montgomery, but it's the world that has the same issues, and there are organizations around the world, and certainly throughout this nation, that are doing something about or working on something that you're interested in.
Thank you so much for your time, Ms.
Thank
Crenshaw.
you.
This was an amazing interview. I'm Tyra Wilson, and this is Ms. Crenshaw, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.